Salutations. My name is A Square. I'm a resident of Flatland. Oh, I do believe that you're at the wrong vantage point to see me. There. Now that you can see me, I'll explain what this is all about, for I have a wondrous tale to tell you about my world and my journeys through the dimensions. I live in Flatland. Imagine a vast sheet of paper on which exist triangles, squares, pentagons, hexagons, and other geometric shapes, but instead of these figures fixed in place, they're freely moving about the surface of the paper. The only thing is that these figures do not have the ability to rise above the paper or sink below its surface. We're very much like shadows, only with hard edges. That should give you an idea what life looks like in Flatland, or at least how it looks from a person like you who lives in Spaceland. The description that I just gave you is a view of Flatland, but it certainly is not how the citizens of Flatland view it. Our perception of our world deserves a little demonstration to make it clearer. Place a penny on a tabletop, and leaning over it, look down upon it. It will appear to be a circle. Now move your line of vision gradually to the edge of the table. The penny will begin to appear less like a circle, and eventually, when you are at the edge of the table, a mere line. That is our visual existence in Flatland, an abundance of lines living together on a flat plane. Now I'm sure that you're asking yourself, how do citizens of Flatland tell who's who? Well, to us that's very simple practice, but I do understand that it might take some explanation. The main way to tell one from another, and people from houses, for that matter, is by sight. First of all, buildings and houses are always pentagons. There are no Flatlanders that are in the shape of pentagons, and of course the buildings are much bigger than any citizen of Flatland. Now that that is clear, let me begin my explanation. In Flatland, there's a constant haziness that is present. In your world, one might say that the day is overcast. Well, in Flatland, it is always overcast and foggy. We use this to our advantage. The closer someone is to us, the clearer they are. Obviously, the adverse of that is that the farther they are away, the more faded they appear. But how does this help us distinguish a circle from a square, from a triangle, or from a polygon? Well, this haze creates shading along our sides when we look at each other. Due to the angles of our bodies, the shading will be more or less as the line of sight moves down the sides of our bodies. The smaller the angle, as in the front half of a triangle or the head of a triangle, the shading will increase more rapidly. The larger the angle, the less gradual the shading will occur. By knowing what different sized angles appear to look like, we are able to deduce the angles present and therefore conclude what shape they are. Voila! There's also a more personal type of deduction of who you are, and that is the art of feeling each other. Now this process is a little different than that of your style of feeling in Spaceland. We feel each other's angles. By touching the angles of a person, we can conclude what shape they are. Like if a citizen of Lineland has 3 angles that are 60 degrees apiece, then you know that they are indeed a triangle. If there are 4 angles of 90 degrees, then you will know they are a square, and so forth. The circles that live in Flatland are a little trickier, but with practice, a Flatlander can decipher what a creature with no angles and is only made up of a curved line is in fact a circle. There are no irregular circles present in Flatland, so a Flatlander knows that any creature that has curved lines is a circle. Also, as I said before, buildings are in the shape of pentagons. Easy as that. So you can see that our science of geometry is integral in our day-to-day lives. Without it, we would be lost and not able to tell who is who or what is what. This simple geometry is all that I and the rest of Flatland thought there was. But through my adventures, I have come to realize that our reality in Flatland is not even close to what is really out there. Let me tell you a story about how I came to learn about other worlds such as Lineland and Spaceland.
My feeble attempt to explain to an inhabitant of Spaceland how life is like on Flatland turns out to be much easier than my attempts to explain the same concept to a citizen of Lineland. And that is where my journey begins, with a dream. One evening, I lay down for bed, happy member of Flatland, not a care in the world. Suddenly, I awoke to find myself not in Flatland anymore. The landscape was still much like Flatland, except there were no houses and no people anywhere in sight. I wandered around for some time, till I stumbled upon a single line out in the distance. I assumed it was a citizen of Flatland, so I made my way toward it. As I got closer to the creature, I started to realize that it was not what I had expected at all. There were small lines on this line moving back and forth between each other. I could hear voices and what seemed like singing coming from the points on the line. Of course, I immediately was curious, yet somehow baffled at a concept of points moving around inside what I still thought was one side of a fellow citizen of Flatland. As I got closer, I started to call out to the creature, or creatures, in an attempt to have it introduce itself to me. "Hello! Hello! Can you hear me?"
Yes, I can hear you. Who are you to beckon the king of Lineland?
Lineland? What on earth was this? I had never heard of such a thing. "You are king? Where is your kingdom?"
Right here. Where are you? I cannot see you. Show yourself.
"I'm right here next to you. Can you not see me?"
I have looked left, and I have looked right, and I do not see you. I demand that you show yourself.
"I'm right to the north of you. Look in that direction."
Do not insult me. I am king. Anyone knows that there are only two directions one can look, left and right. I have looked both and cannot see you. Now you are trying my patience. Show yourself and explain your intention.
"I apologize, Your Majesty. I mean no harm. My name is A Square, and I come from a land called Flatland." I realized that the king could indeed not see north or south, only left or right. This completely astounded me, but I tried not to let it bother me while I investigated further the laws of nature in Lineland. "If you cannot see me in my current position, I will lower myself onto your world and make my presence known."
What sort of magic is this? One moment you were just a voice with no form, and now you appear before me.
"I've lowered myself onto the line that you reside on. Since you can see in only two directions, and I was sitting in a direction you could not see, I moved to where you could see me. Let me ask you, Your Majesty, how do you distinguish who is who in your kingdom and where they are in relation to you? Since you have no real form of sight and are not able to feel anyone except those directly beside you, how do you know who is who?"
By the use of hearing, of course. You see, each citizen of Lineland has 2 eyes, 2 ears, and 2 mouths. One set on each end of them. We project our voices to one another. The first voice reaches the ear of another faster than the second voice. The delay between the 2 voices tells us what shape the individual is. When the voices are heard, the reply is sounded. The total time for the voices to return tells us the distance away this individual is from you.
Would it not be much simpler to use sight and feeling to learn the shape and location of your subjects?
This is the only way. How irrational you are! How would I see my subjects? I turn left, and I see the end of one of my subjects. Then turn right, and see the end of another. There is no way for me to determine the shape of them without using my hearing and my voice.
I understand your concepts, but coming from a land where sight and touch are obviously more evolved than yours, I find this process of yours not the most accurate. Listen, when I approached your land, I saw you moving left and right. I also saw 5 of your citizens to the left of you and 7 to the right of you. I used my ability of sight to know these things. Am I not correct about the number of your subjects on each side of you?
You are right about my subjects, but you must have heard these things and then dreamt that you saw them, because in nature, space is a line. There is no way for one to move as you say you can move. That is the law of nature in line land. You spoke of north and south. I have no knowledge of such things. Please explain them to me, because I am assuming you have 2 words for left and 2 for right.
Not so. In addition to your concept of left and right, there are other forms of direction, north and south.
I demand that you show me these directions.
Fortunately, I cannot show you these directions, unless you were able to step out of your line altogether.
Out of my line? You mean out of this world? Out of space?
Well, yes, out of your world, out of your space, because your space is not the true whole of space. The real space is a plane with 4 directions of sight and movement. Your space is only a line.
If you cannot show me, explain it to me in words. I will have you know that I am becoming quite impatient with you and your ludicrous ideas. Now, explain to me this idea of your so-called true space.
After hearing you describe your space, and knowing that you have a much more limited existence than mine, I'm afraid that I cannot explain to you in words the true idea of space. I feel that actions are the only way.
Where have you gone? He has vanished. What sort of magic is this?
Does that at last show you that there are other directions of movement?
That only shows me that you possess a strange form of magic that can make yourself vanish. I did not see any movement. All I saw was that you were here, then vanished, then reappeared again. You tell me you see all of my subjects around me, when you have obviously heard them. I am done with your foolishness. No one tries to fool the king of Lineland and gets away with it.
Now you have insulted me. You declare that you can see, yet all that you see is a point. I, on the other hand, am more evolved than you and can see lines and feel shapes of my fellow citizens of Flatland. How dare you say that I am just using magic to fool you when the concepts that I have shared with you are absolute truths? I am not the smartest of Flatlanders, yet I most certainly have more knowledge about the nature of things than any one of you from Lineland. I've tried to tear down your barriers of ignorance, and you do not even try to comprehend it.
You will pay for these outrageous assertions. Subjects of Lineland, attack!
So that was my experience with the King of Lineland. It did not go very well, did it? Well, I'll tell you, looking back on the whole encounter, I would have to say that the king acted just as I did when I met someone from your world, Spaceland. One day, I was working with my grandson, teaching him the basic knowledge of Flatland geometry. We were going over the concept of how to understand the area or square footage of a square resident of Flatland. So first, let's say there's a line that's 3 inches long.
Right.
And let's say that this line moves to its right 3 inches. And let's say that this path that the line took left a trail behind him showing his movements.
Okay.
What do you suppose is the space that the path left by this line is?
The space is 3 squared or 9 square inches?
Now, do you understand how that bit of math could be used by a resident of Flatland to deduce how large a square resident of Flatland is?
I guess I do. I would figure out what the length of one side of that person is, and then multiply that number by itself. If the square resident has a side on him that is 4 inches, then I would multiply 4 by 4, and I would get 16. 16 would be the area of space that the Flatland citizen would take up.
Very good, grandson.
I have just one question. What if a square moved like the line did in your lesson? But what if that square did not move up, down, left, or right? What if it moved out?
Out? There is no such thing.
I mean, out of Flatland. I know this sounds crazy, but what if by some force of nature, the square was able to move in a way that no one in Flatland has ever moved? I feel that there is more out there than we know of. We in Flatland cannot have all the answers to geometry. What if there was another dimension other than the 2 we know of?
Stop with your foolishness. You are saying that there is a third dimension. You know that there are only 2 dimensions.
I am just going by your logic. If a line moving creates that path that we measured, what if a square moving the length of its side created a path? And this square moved in that way I was talking about, out of Flatland. How would we measure the path created? Would we take the length and multiply it by a factor of 3 instead of 2?
We would check to see if we were dreaming. That is what we would do. I'm growing tired of your ridiculous ideas.
I mean, in order to get the square footage of that square, I took the length of one of its sides and multiplied it by itself. I'm just going by your logic in your lesson.
Go to bed. If you would talk less nonsense, you'd remember more sense.
Your grandson was on to something.
Who is that?
Oh, I figure because I'm not even with your world, you cannot see me.
What are you talking about? What? What form of magic is this? How are you making yourself do that? How did you get into my house?
Your grandson was on to something for sure. I am called Sphere. I come to you from a land called Spaceland. That concept of the factor of 3, brilliant little square you have there.
I don't believe this. This has to be some sort of trick.
Your grandson's theory of the square moving out of Flatland is the very basis of geometry. 3-dimensional geometry. The geometry of Spaceland. Height, width, and depth.
That's preposterous. There are only 2 dimensions in geometry, height and width. Everyone knows that.
Everyone in Flatland knows that, you mean. I guess it is time for you to learn the whole truth about geometry. Now, this might seem ridiculous to you, but hear me out.
I'm not sure that I even want to hear your lies.
Okay, I understand by watching your world that you use angles as sight recognition of each other and your surroundings.
That is true. Are you going to say that this is not actually happening?
Not at all. You are indeed using sight. But in order for your sight recognition to work, these lines and angles that you are viewing need to have a measurable amount of depth in order for them to actually take up space. Without this depth of the lines that make up you Flatlanders, you would not be able to see each other's angles or sides. There has to be a 3rd dimension raised above Flatland for you to be able to see the line itself.
I do not know where you came from, and frankly, I do not care. But I am not going to stand in my house and be told these lies. Your crazy talk does not prove anything to me. I see what I see, and I'm able to see height and width.
I was afraid that would be your reaction. Why is it when someone hears something that alters their reality, they immediately discount it? Well, because of your reaction, I guess that actions will speak louder than words.
What is happening?
I am going to prove to you that there is a 3rd dimension.
What have you done to me? This is some sort of magic trick. What have you done?
I have taken you where no Flatlander has been before, out of Flatland, and into Spaceland. That area below us, that is your world, Flatland.
What? How is this possible? I must be dreaming.
You are most certainly not dreaming. You are viewing your world from the eyes of an inhabitant of Spaceland. Look, visible angles that you do not have to judge by the shadow of the two lines that make it.
That's incredible. Are you telling me that these figures below are my fellow Flatlanders? I'm having a serious time comprehending this.
Of course you are. I have shown you the reality of another dimension. It will take time for you to process all that you have learned. Here, I will give you an example of how the third dimension that you know now exists works in creating space. You see, before, you only knew of space being that of width and height. Let's take a square of 5 inches. The area that would be 25 square inches. Your grandson was definitely right when he talked about how to calculate area. But he was also right with his theory of a factor of 3 to calculate the space that a cube would take up. You see, a cube is 6 squares put together. To get the measurement of a cube, you would multiply the height of the cube by the width of the cube by the depth of the cube. 5 by 5 by 5. 125 would be the space the cube takes up, or the volume, as we call it in Spaceland. Are you following me?
I had a dream the other night that I traveled to a world that was inhabited by creatures that lived only in one dimension. When I tried to explain how there were in fact 2 dimensions, the king of Flatland got furious with me and tried to kill me. I'm starting to understand how he must have felt.
Now look, I can move up, down, left, and right, like in Flatland, right?
I do know this much. Yes, I understand how movement works.
Well, with the addition of the third dimension, I can also move forward and backward. See?
Through a long and arduous process, Sphere began to get through to me. I, though I did my best not to believe, had learned about the third dimension and the rules of geometry in Spaceland. I was excited about going back to Flatland and telling everyone about what I had learned. Amazing! I would never have thought of such a wild concept. When my grandson was making comments about the theory of volume in a third dimension, I immediately got angry and sent him to his room. I should have given his ideas a chance.
Do not beat yourself up over it too much. It is a real hard process to accept something that does not exist in one's reality. You seem to accept it now, since you have seen what truly exists. This is what matters. But remember, when you do travel back to Flatland, remember your own skepticism of the third dimension when you try to explain to others what you have learned. But also remember that you might be taken as a fool. You thought I was a fool when I professed the concept of the third dimension to you. Be careful of who you tell. Only open-minded people will even give you a chance.
Grandson, I have some wonderful news. Do you remember our conversation yesterday concerning your little theory of multiplying a length of a side by the power of 3?
Yes. I don't believe it. I never did. I was just speculating and playing around. Please don't get mad with me again.
Don't worry, boy. I didn't come here to yell at you. I came here to tell you how smart you are.
For what?
For theorizing about our geometry and not being satisfied with believing that it is all there is. I had a visitor last night.
Are you feeling okay, Grandfather?
Just fine. Anyways, I had this visitor. She told me your theory was correct. Well, needless to say, I thought this visitor was just crazy. But then she showed me something.
What did she show you?
Spaceland.
Spaceland? What in the world is that?
It is a land where a third dimension exists. I know it sounds crazy, but remember your thoughts on traveling out of Flatland? Well, guess what? I did it.
Grandfather, I think you are still dreaming. That could never happen. You said it yourself. There are only 2 dimensions.
I know it sounds impossible, but Sphere, that is what she called herself, took me up, out of Flatland. I was able to see all of Flatland at once.
That is impossible, grandfather. The rules of geometry forbid anything like that from happening. I think you might have lost your marbles.
The sphere also explained to me the concept of moving in more directions than up, down, left, and right. She was able to move out and back again. I'm realizing it harder to explain without showing you. But you have to believe me.
I do not know what happened to you, but you have been tricked. This idea of movement other than up, down, left, right is insane. There is no possible way that anyone could do that. If you could show me somehow, then I might be more convinced. But right now, I think you have really lost it.
And that is how it is with everyone I tried to tell. All of my friends, co-workers, and family did not believe me. I guess Sphere was right that it would be difficult to explain the idea of 3 dimensions without proof. The reality of a flatlander is based on 2 dimensions. I should have known that trying to prove otherwise was an uphill challenge. Well, I will say this. Knowing now that there is a 3rd dimension makes settling back into 2 dimensions seem very small in comparison. You should be glad you have that option of a 3rd dimension.